The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Arizona desert as Jake Morrison adjusted his worn leather hat and squinted at the horizon. The 28-year-old cowboy had been tracking stolen cattle for 3 days, following hoofprints that led deeper into Apache territory than any sensible man would venture alone. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Belle, snorted nervously as they approached a narrow canyon where the tracks seemed to vanish. Jake had grown up on stories about the Apache people from his grandfather, an old cavalry soldier who spoke of their fierce warriors and deep connection to the land. Unlike many settlers who viewed them only as enemies, Jake's grandfather had taught him respect for their culture and warned him that the desert belonged to them long before any white man set foot on it. This knowledge weighed heavily on Jake's mind as he realized he might have crossed into sacred hunting grounds. The stolen cattle belonged to the Martinez family, Mexican ranchers who had always treated Jake fairly and paid him well for his work. Their prize bull and 12 head of cattle represented their entire livelihood, and without them, the family would face starvation during the harsh winter months ahead. Jake couldn't return empty-handed, knowing that Maria Martinez's children depended on the milk from those cows and the income from selling beef to nearby settlements. As Jake dismounted to examine the ground more closely, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Mixed with the cattle tracks were unshod horse prints and moccasin marks, clear signs that Apache hunters had been in the area recently. The tracks appeared fresh, no more than a few hours old, and they led directly toward a series of tall red rock formations that provided perfect cover for an ambush. Belle whinnied softly and tossed her head. Her ears pricked forward as she sensed something Jake couldn't yet see. Years of working with horses had taught him to trust their instincts, and Belle's nervous energy told him they were being watched. Jake slowly reached for his rifle, trying to appear casual while scanning the rocks above for any sign of movement. The sound came without warning, a low whistle that echoed off the canyon walls, followed by the distinctive war cry that had struck fear into the hearts of settlers for generations. Jake spun around just in time to see 3 Apache warriors emerge from behind the rocks, their faces painted for battle and their weapons drawn. These weren't the cattle thieves he had expected to find, but rather young braves who saw his presence as a violation of their sacred lands. The leader of the group, a tall warrior with eagle feathers in his hair, stepped forward and spoke in a mixture of Apache and broken English. His words carried the weight of ancient tradition and territorial protection. "White man rides where spirits walk. You bring death to sacred place. Why you follow tracks of Skyfather's children?" Jake raised his hands slowly, keeping his rifle pointed toward the ground while his mind raced to find words that might save his life. He had heard enough Apache phrases from his grandfather to understand that Skyfather's children referred to cattle, which many Apache considered sacred animals connected to their spiritual beliefs. The realization hit him that these warriors might not be thieves at all, but rather protectors trying to drive the cattle away from white settlers. "I seek stolen cattle that belong to Mexican family," Jake replied carefully, using the simple English his grandfather had taught him was most likely to be understood. "Small children go hungry without milk cows. I mean no harm to sacred places or Skyfather's children." The second warrior, younger than the first but with the same fierce determination in his eyes, notched an arrow to his bow and aimed it directly at Jake's chest. "Mexican settlers, white settlers, all same. Take land, kill buffalo, make Apache children hungry. You turn back now, or join ancestors in spirit world." Jake knew that any sudden movement would result in an arrow through his heart. But he also understood that showing fear would be interpreted as weakness. Drawing on every lesson his grandfather had taught him about Apache culture, he slowly removed his hat as a sign of respect and placed it over his heart. "I understand your anger, brave warrior. White men have brought much pain to your people. But these cattle feed children, just as Apache children need food. Can we not find path that helps all children eat?" The third member of the group surprised Jake by stepping forward and speaking in clear English. Unlike the others, this warrior was younger, perhaps no more than 18, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to Jake's intentions. "You speak of feeding children, white cowboy, but your people steal our hunting grounds and drive away the deer and elk that feed our children. Why should Apache help you recover cattle when your kind shows no mercy to ours?" Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He knew that his next words could determine whether he lived or died. But more importantly, they might decide the fate of the Martinez children, who depended on those cattle for survival. Because some white men are different, he said quietly. My grandfather fought your people in war. But he taught me that Apache are honorable and wise. He said Apache warriors protect the innocent, even when those innocents look different from them. The young warrior's expression shifted slightly, as if Jake's words had touched something deep within him. Your grandfather knew Apache ways? What name did he carry in war? Samuel Morrison of the 3rd Cavalry, Jake replied honestly. He lost his left arm in battle near Canyon de Chelly. But he always said the Apache warrior who wounded him fought with honor and courage. After the war, he spent his life trying to make peace between our peoples. The 3 warriors exchanged glances and spoke rapidly in their native language. Jake caught a few words that his grandfather had taught him. Words that seemed to relate to honor, truth, and ancient agreements. The discussion grew heated, with the youngest warrior appearing to argue against the other's position, while pointing repeatedly in Jake's direction. Finally, the leader raised his hand for silence and turned back to Jake. If your grandfather was Samuel Morrison, he was known to our elders as Broken Wing who speaks truth. He saved Apache children from sickness when army doctors would not treat them. For his memory, we give you chance to prove your words are straight like his. Jake felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. What must I do to prove my words are true? The young warrior stepped forward again, his hand resting on a curved knife at his belt. Stolen cattle you seek are not taken by Apache hands. White men dressed as Apache took Skyfather's children to make trouble between your people and ours. These false Apache left tracks leading to our sacred places, hoping soldiers would come and punish us for crimes we did not commit. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. He had heard rumors of white men disguising themselves as Indians to justify military action against various tribes, but he had never encountered such deception firsthand. If what you say is true, then the real thieves are still out there, and the Martinez family will never recover their cattle. This is why we offer you test, the leader explained. Help us track real thieves and stop their lies about Apache people. But if you agree to this path, you must accept Apache justice if you fail or betray our trust. Jake looked at the 3 young warriors, understanding that his decision would affect far more than just his own survival. If he refused their offer, he would likely be killed on the spot, leaving the Martinez family to face starvation, and the Apache to be blamed for crimes they didn't commit. If he accepted, he would be risking his life to help people who had every reason to consider him an enemy. What does Apache justice mean for a white man who fails in his promise? Jake asked, knowing he needed to understand the full consequences of his choice. The youngest warrior smiled grimly and touched a series of blue and red markings on his arm. These marks tell story of warriors' deeds and promises. If you accept our offer, you receive similar markings that bind you to Apache way of honor. Break your word or fail in your duty, and these marks become signal for any Apache warrior to claim your life as payment for broken trust. Jake stared at the intricate tattoos on the young warrior's arm, understanding that accepting such markings would essentially put a permanent price on his head if he failed to live up to his agreement. Yet he also realized that this might be the only way to save both the Martinez family and prevent an innocent tribe from being punished for crimes committed by white criminals. The leader spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of ancient tradition. We give you time to think while sun moves across sky. When shadows grow short at midday, you must choose, accept our markings, and help find real thieves. Or, we release you to ride back where you came from. But cattle remain lost forever. Jake nodded slowly, understanding that his decision would reshape everything he thought he knew about justice, honor, and survival in the harsh desert landscape. As the 3 Apache warriors melted back into the rocks to wait for his answer, Jake was left alone with his thoughts, and the growing realization that his grandfather's teachings about respect and understanding between different peoples were about to be put to the ultimate test. The sun climbed higher in the desert sky as Jake Morrison faced the most important decision of his life, knowing that whatever choice he made would determine not only his own fate, but the survival of innocent children and the future relationship between 2 peoples who had been enemies for too long. In the distance, Belle stood patiently waiting, as if she understood that her master's next words would change everything forever. When the sun reached its highest point in the desert sky, Jake Morrison made his decision. He had spent the morning hours thinking about the Martinez children, his grandfather's teachings, and the 3 Apache warriors who had offered him an impossible choice. As the shadows grew short beneath the rocky overhangs, Jake called out to the hidden warriors, "I accept your terms," his voice echoed across the canyon. "I will take the markings and help you find the real thieves." The 3 Apache warriors emerged from their concealment as silently as they had disappeared. The youngest one, who Jake learned was called Swift Arrow, carried a small leather pouch containing the tools needed for the marking ceremony. The leader, whose name was Stone Bear, explained that the markings would be applied to Jake's left forearm and would tell the story of his promise to help the Apache people seek justice. Red Hawk, the second warrior, built a small fire using dry brush and sacred herbs, while Stone Bear prepared the marking tools. "These marks will bind you to Apache way," Stone Bear explained as he heated a thin metal rod over the flames. "Blue lines represent truth that flows like river. Red dots represent blood, oath to protect, innocent. Black symbols represent your promise to bring criminals to justice." Jake rolled up his sleeve and extended his left arm, trying not to think about the pain that was coming or the permanent nature of what he was about to receive. Swift Arrow mixed plant dyes in a small clay bowl while Red Hawk spoke in Apache, offering prayers to the spirits for guidance and protection during their dangerous mission. The marking process took nearly an hour, during which Jake gritted his teeth against the burning sensation as the heated metal traced intricate patterns across his forearm. The Apache warriors worked with practiced precision, creating symbols that told a story only they could fully understand. When they finished, Jake's arm bore markings similar to those he had seen on Swift Arrow, but with subtle differences that marked him as an outsider who had earned temporary trust. "Now you are bound by Apache honor," Stone Bear said solemnly. "These marks will be recognized by any Apache warrior who sees them. They will know you have made sacred promise to help our people. But remember, break this trust, and those same marks become invitation for any warrior to claim your life." With the ceremony complete, the 4 men began planning their pursuit of the real cattle thieves. Swift Arrow revealed that he had been tracking the criminals for 2 days and had discovered they were using an abandoned mine shaft about 20 miles south as their hiding place. The thieves, he explained, were led by a man called Black Pete McGraw, a former cavalry soldier who had been discharged from the army for stealing military supplies. Red Hawk added crucial information about McGraw's gang. They dress like Apache when they steal, then change back to white man clothes when they sell stolen animals. They have Apache clothing and war paint, but they cannot hide white man smell or white man way of walking. Our women and children know they are false Apache, but white settlements believe their lies. Jake felt anger building in his chest as he realized the full scope of the criminals' plan. By disguising themselves as Apache raiders, McGraw's gang could steal cattle and horses while ensuring that military retaliation would fall on innocent tribes rather than the real thieves. It was a cowardly strategy that put Apache families at risk while allowing the criminals to operate with relative safety. The plan they developed was dangerous but simple. Jake would approach the mine entrance openly, pretending to be a potential buyer for stolen cattle. His story would be that he represented a group of settlers looking to purchase beef without asking too many questions about ownership. Meanwhile, the 3 Apache warriors would position themselves around the mine to prevent any of the thieves from escaping. As they rode toward the abandoned mine, Swift Arrow shared more details about McGraw's operation. The gang consisted of 5 men, all former soldiers who had turned to crime after being discharged from various cavalry units. They had been operating for nearly 6 months, stealing cattle and horses from Mexican ranchers and small homesteaders, while leaving enough Apache-style evidence to fool local authorities. "McGraw is clever, but not wise," Swift Arrow explained as they approached a ridge overlooking the mine. "He knows how to make tracks look like Apache work, how to leave broken arrows and torn moccasins. But he does not understand that Apache would never steal cattle near sacred places, and Apache raiders do not leave so much sign for enemies to follow." From their vantage point on the ridge, Jake could see the mine entrance and several crude shelters built around it. Smoke rose from a cooking fire, and he could make out at least 4 men moving around the camp. More importantly, he could see the stolen cattle penned in a natural corral formed by rock walls near the mine entrance. Red Hawk pointed to specific animals in the herd. Mexican bull with white mark on head, this is animal you seek. Also brown cow, with split ear. And black cow, with white spots. These belong to family you serve. Jake felt relief mixed with determination as he confirmed that the Martinez cattle were indeed being held at the mine. Now all he had to do was get close enough to the thieves to gather evidence while the Apache warriors positioned themselves to prevent escape. The plan seemed straightforward, but Jake knew that dealing with desperate criminals in their own hideout would be extremely dangerous. Stone Bear explained the signals they would use to coordinate their attack. When you have heard enough words to prove their guilt, touch your hat 3 times. This tells us to move into position. When you are ready for us to close trap, remove your hat completely and wave it once. Then we strike together. As Jake prepared to ride down to the mine, Swift Arrow gave him a final warning. These men have killed before, and they will kill again if they suspect trap. Be careful not to ask too many questions too quickly. Let them think you are as crooked as they are. Jake mounted Bell and rode slowly down the winding path toward the mine entrance, his heart pounding as he rehearsed his story. He would pose as a representative of a group of settlers who needed cattle quickly and quietly, no questions asked. The key would be getting McGraw to admit to stealing the animals and framing the Apache people for his crimes. The first person to notice Jake's approach was a thin, nervous-looking man with a scraggly beard who was tending the cooking fire. "Rider coming in," he called out, reaching for a rifle that lay across a nearby rock. A larger man emerged from one of the shelters, and Jake immediately recognized the description he had been given of Black Pete McGraw. The gang leader was a massive man, with gray-streaked hair and the bearing of a career soldier. His eyes were cold and calculating as he studied Jake's approach, clearly trying to determine whether the visitor represented opportunity or danger. "That's close enough, stranger," McGraw called out when Jake was still 50 yards from the camp. "State your business, or turn around and ride back where you came from." Jake reined in Bell and raised his hand slightly to show he meant no immediate harm. "Name's Morrison. I represent a group of settlers up north who need cattle without too many questions being asked. Heard you might be able to help with that kind of arrangement." McGraw's expression shifted slightly, showing interest mixed with continued suspicion. "Depends on how many head you need and how much you're willing to pay. Also depends on why you need cattle without questions. We're starting a new settlement in territory that's still disputed between the government and local tribes," Jake replied, sticking to the story he had prepared. "Don't want to wait for official land grants and cattle purchases that might take years. Need animals now to get through the winter." The gang leader studied Jake for a long moment before motioning him forward. "Come on in then. But keep your hands where I can see them. We'll talk business, but any sudden moves, and you'll be buzzard bait before you can blink." As Jake rode into the camp, he counted 5 men just as Swift Arrow had predicted. Besides McGraw and the thin man by the fire, there were 3 others who emerged from various shelters and hiding places. All of them were armed and clearly experienced at violence, but Jake also noticed they seemed relaxed and confident in their remote hideout. McGraw gestured toward the penned cattle. "Got about 30 head here, including some prime breeding stock. Most of it came from Mexican ranchers, who won't be missed much by local authorities. Some pieces came from homesteaders who got too close to Apache territory and learned the hard way that Indians don't like uninvited neighbors." Jake felt his anger flare at McGraw's casual reference to blaming Apache people for his crimes, but he kept his expression neutral. "Apache giving you much trouble? Heard they've been raiding pretty heavily in this area lately." "Apache?" McGraw laughed and spat into the dust. "Hell, half the Apache raids around here are really us dressed up in war paint and feathers. Indians get blamed, we get rich, and the army gets to play soldier chasing ghosts through the desert. Perfect arrangement for everyone except the Apache. And who gives a damn about them anyway?" This was exactly the confession Jake needed, but he forced himself to show interest rather than disgust. Smart thinking. Must take some doing to make it look convincing, though. The thin man by the fire spoke up proudly. Pete here used to scout for the cavalry, so he knows all about how Apache fight and what kind of sign they leave. We got war paint, feathers, moccasins, even some genuine Apache arrows we took off dead warriors. When we hit a ranch dressed up proper, even Apache would think Apache did it. Jake touched his hat once, twice, 3 times, the signal that he had heard enough evidence to prove the gang's guilt. Somewhere in the rocks above, he knew the 3 Apache warriors were moving into position to prevent escape. Now he needed to keep the criminals talking until his allies were ready to strike. McGraw walked over to examine the cattle more closely. "Take this Mexican bull here. Finest breeding stock you'll find anywhere. Took him from a family down south who thought they could raise cattle on Apache hunting grounds. Course, it wasn't really Apache who took their animals. But they'll never know the difference." "What happened to the family?" Jake asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the full scope of the criminals' activities. "Oh, they're still alive," McGraw replied with a cruel grin. "For now, anyway. But without their cattle, they won't last through the winter. Might end up having to sell their land cheap to white buyers, which suits everyone just fine. Except them, of course." Jake's hand moved unconsciously toward the new markings on his arm, feeling the burning reminder of his promise to the Apache warriors. These criminals weren't just thieves. They were actively working to destroy innocent families while ensuring that blame fell on people who had nothing to do with their crimes. One of the other gang members, a man with a distinctive scar across his cheek, approached Jake with obvious suspicion. "Something bothers me about this whole setup, Pete. This fellow shows up asking about cattle right after we pulled that job on the Mexican ranch. Could be he's working for law, or maybe even for the Mexicans themselves." McGraw's eyes narrowed as he studied Jake more carefully. "You raise a good point. Scar. Morrison, wasn't it? Tell me, Morrison, exactly how did you hear about our operation? We don't exactly advertise our services in the local newspaper." Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead as he realized the situation was turning dangerous. He needed to maintain his cover long enough for the Apache warriors to get into final position, but the gang's suspicion was clearly growing. "Heard talk in a saloon up in Tucson. Fellow said there was a group working this area who could provide cattle without asking too many questions about brands or ownership papers." "What fellow?" Scar pressed. "What did he look like? And what saloon was this?" Before Jake could answer, the sound of horses approaching echoed off the canyon walls. McGraw and his men immediately reached for their weapons, assuming they were about to be attacked by law enforcement or rival criminals. In the confusion that followed, Jake realized that his carefully planned approach was about to turn into a deadly gunfight. And he was trapped in the middle, with enemies on all sides, and allies he could barely trust. The moment had come to remove his hat and signal the final attack, but as Jake reached up to give the signal, he found himself staring down the barrel of McGraw's rifle and wondering if he would live long enough to see justice done for the Martinez family and the Apache people who had trusted him with their sacred markings. The approaching horses turned out to be 3 more members of McGraw's gang returning from a scouting mission, but their arrival created enough confusion for Jake to realize his situation had become desperate. McGraw kept his rifle trained on Jake, while barking orders to his men to take defensive positions around the camp. "Something ain't right here," McGraw declared, his cold eyes never leaving Jake's face. "First time in 6 months anyone's found this place. And it just happens to be when we're sitting on the biggest haul we've ever taken. Morrison, you're going to tell me exactly who sent you, or I'm going to start putting holes in you until you decide to talk." Jake knew that his next words would determine whether he lived or died, and whether the Martinez family would ever see their cattle again. The Apache warriors were somewhere in the rocks above, but he had no way of knowing if they were ready to attack or if they would even try to save him if the situation went bad. "Nobody sent me," Jake said firmly, looking McGraw straight in the eye. "But you're right to be suspicious. I'm not here to buy stolen cattle. I'm here to take back what belongs to the Martinez family, and to make sure you pay for framing innocent Apache people for your crimes." The confession sent a shock through the gang members, who immediately raised their weapons and prepared to shoot. But before anyone could fire, Jake did something that surprised everyone present. He yanked off his hat and began waving it frantically while shouting at the top of his lungs, "Stop! "I'll take responsibility," Jake yelled, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "These markings on my arm mean I'm bound by Apache honor to see justice done. Kill me if you want. But the truth about your crimes is already known." McGraw stared at Jake as if he had lost his mind. "What the hell are you talking about, markings? Have you gone completely loco?" Jake rolled up his left sleeve to reveal the fresh Apache tattoos that marked his alliance with Stone Bear, Red Hawk, and Swift Arrow. The intricate blue, red, and black symbols were still healing from the morning ceremony, and they clearly identified him as someone who had made a sacred promise to the Apache people. "These marks tell the story of my oath to help Apache warriors bring you to justice," Jake declared. "You've been stealing cattle and horses while dressed as Apache raiders, making innocent tribes pay for your crimes. But 3 Apache warriors know the truth, and they're watching this camp right now." Scar laughed harshly and pointed his pistol at Jake's head. "If there's Apache warriors around here, where are they? All I see is one crazy cowboy with some fresh ink on his arm talking about honor and justice like he's some kind of preacher." Jake's answer came in the form of an arrow that suddenly appeared in the wooden post directly between Scar and McGraw, vibrating from the force of its impact. The arrow was followed immediately by the distinctive war cry that had terrified settlers and soldiers across the Southwest for generations. "That's where they are," Jake said grimly as chaos erupted throughout the camp. Stone Bear, Red Hawk, and Swift Arrow appeared as if they had materialized from the rocks themselves, moving with the fluid grace and deadly precision that had made Apache warriors legendary. They had positioned themselves to cut off all escape routes from the camp, and their sudden appearance sent McGraw's men scrambling for cover behind rocks and buildings. McGraw himself dove behind the cattle pen and began firing wildly in the direction of the Apache warriors. But his shots went wide as panic affected his aim. "It's a trap," he screamed to his men. "Kill the cowboy, and then we'll deal with the Indians." But Jake was no longer standing where McGraw expected him to be. The moment the Apache attack began, Jake had rolled behind Bell and pulled his rifle from its saddle holster. Now he was in position to prevent the gang members from escaping toward the mine entrance, while his Apache allies controlled the other routes. Swift Arrow moved like his namesake, using the rocky terrain to stay hidden while picking off gang members with precisely placed arrows. His first shot disabled the thin man by the fire, sending an arrow through his shoulder that spun him around and dropped him to the ground. His second arrow found Scar's gun hand, forcing him to drop his weapon and seek cover. Red Hawk had positioned himself above the main camp and was using a captured army rifle to keep the gang members pinned down behind inadequate cover. His shots were carefully aimed to wound rather than kill, following Apache tradition that valued capturing enemies alive when possible. Stone Bear moved through the camp like a force of nature, his traditional weapons making no sound as he systematically eliminated the gang's ability to fight back. He reached the first returning scout before the man even realized he was under attack, knocking him unconscious with a precise blow from his war club. Jake found himself face to face with McGraw when the gang leader tried to circle around the cattle pen to reach his horse. The two men confronted each other in a clear area between the rock walls, each armed and ready to fight. But Jake held a crucial advantage. He was fighting for justice, rather than just survival. "You made one big mistake, McGraw," Jake said as he kept his rifle trained on the gang leader. "You underestimated the Apache people. They're not the savage raiders you pretended to be. They're honorable warriors who protect the innocent and punish those who prey on the weak." McGraw raised his own rifle, but his hands were shaking with rage and fear. "Honor? Justice? You're talking about a bunch of heathen savages who should have been wiped out years ago. Everything I did was just speeding up the natural order of things." "The natural order according to who?" Jake demanded. "You've been stealing from families who never did you any harm, leaving children to starve while you got rich. Then you made sure innocent Apache people got blamed for your crimes. That's not natural order. That's pure evil." The confrontation between Jake and McGraw was interrupted when one of the gang members tried to make a break for freedom, only to find himself face to face with Swift Arrow. The young Apache warrior spoke in clear English as he blocked the criminal's escape route. "You wore sacred feathers of my people while committing crimes," Swift Arrow said coldly. "You painted your face with Apache colors while bringing dishonor to Apache name. For this, You will face Apache justice." The gang member dropped his weapon and raised his hands in surrender, clearly understanding that his situation was hopeless. One by one, the other criminals followed suit as they realized they were completely outmatched by opponents who knew the terrain better than they ever could. McGraw was the last to surrender, and he did so only after Jake managed to wound him in the leg with a carefully placed shot that dropped him to the ground but left him alive to face trial. As the gang leader lay bleeding in the dust, he looked up at Jake with hatred burning in his eyes. "You think you've won something here, Morrison? Even if you turn us in, there's a dozen other gangs doing the same thing we were doing. Apache will keep getting blamed for crimes they didn't commit, and white settlers will keep pushing them off their lands until there's nothing left." Jake looked down at the defeated criminal and felt both satisfaction and sadness. "Maybe you're right about other gangs, McGraw, but this gang is finished, and the truth about what you were doing is going to be told. Sometimes that's all one man can do, tell the truth and hope it makes a difference." Stone Bear approached with rope to tie up the captured criminals, but he paused to examine Jake's rifle wound from where a stray bullet had grazed his shoulder during the fighting. The Apache leader's expression was unreadable as he applied a field bandage using traditional healing methods. "You fought with honor, Morrison," Stone Bear said quietly. "Your grandfather would be proud of what you accomplished here today. These markings on your arm have been proven by your actions." Swift Arrow gathered the scattered Apache disguises that McGraw's gang had used in their false raids, including war paint, feathers, and moccasins. "These sacred items will be returned to their proper place," he announced. "Never again will they be used to bring dishonor to Apache people." Red Hawk had already begun separating the stolen cattle according to their brands and markings. The Martinez bull and cows were clearly identifiable, as were animals belonging to several other families throughout the territory. The recovery of this livestock would mean the difference between survival and starvation for multiple families during the coming winter. As they prepared to transport the captured criminals to the nearest territorial prison, Jake realized that his adventure had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. The markings on his arm had become more than just symbols of an oath. They represented a new understanding of what it meant to seek justice in a land where different peoples were struggling to coexist. Stone Bear offered Jake a final piece of Apache wisdom as they prepared to part ways. "Your grandfather taught you to respect all people, even those who look different from you. Today you proved that respect can build bridges between enemies and create strength where there was only suspicion. This is the true power of honor." The journey back to return the cattle to their rightful owners took 2 days, during which Jake had time to reflect on everything that had happened. The Apache warriors accompanied him part of the way, helping to drive the livestock and ensuring that McGraw's gang was securely bound for transport to the authorities. When they finally reached the Martinez ranch, Jake was greeted with tears of joy and gratitude that made all the risks he had taken seem worthwhile. Maria Martinez wept openly as she saw her precious cattle returning, knowing that her children would have milk through the winter and that the family's survival was assured. The story of how Jake had worked with Apache warriors to recover the stolen cattle and expose the criminal gang spread quickly throughout the territory. For the first time in years, some settlers began to question whether all Apache raids were really what they seemed to be, and a few even began to consider the possibility that cooperation might be more effective than conflict. Jake's reputation as a man who could work with people of different cultures made him valuable to territorial authorities who were struggling to maintain peace between various groups. He found himself serving as an unofficial mediator in several disputes, using the lessons his grandfather had taught him and the wisdom he had gained from his Apache allies. The markings on his arm healed completely within a month, leaving permanent symbols that served as a reminder of his promise to seek justice and protect the innocent. Whenever other cowboys or settlers asked about the unusual tattoos, Jake would tell them the story of how 3 Apache warriors had trusted him to help them prove their people's innocence. Stone Bear, Red Hawk, and Swift Arrow eventually became Jake's lifelong friends and allies. They worked together on several other missions to stop criminals who were taking advantage of racial tensions to cover their crimes. Their partnership became a model for cooperation that helped reduce conflict in their region of the territory. McGraw and his gang were eventually tried and convicted for cattle rustling, fraud, and conspiracy to incite violence against innocent civilians. The evidence that Jake and his Apache allies had gathered was overwhelming, and the criminals received lengthy prison sentences that ensured they would never again terrorize innocent families. The Martinez family prospered with their recovered cattle, and they never forgot the cowboy who had risked everything to help them. Maria Martinez insisted that Jake would always have a place at their table and a home on their land if he ever needed it. Years later, when Jake had become a respected peace officer and territorial mediator, he would often look at the markings on his arm and remember the day when his desperate shout in a desert canyon had changed not only his own life, but the lives of everyone who had been touched by one gang's cruel deception. The Apache symbols had indeed become his hope for understanding, hope for justice, and hope for a future where different peoples could work together instead of fighting each other. The legacy of that desperate stand in the desert lived on in the stories told around campfires and dinner tables throughout the Southwest, inspiring others to look beyond racial prejudice and seek the truth about crimes that seemed too convenient to believe. Jake Morrison had learned that sometimes taking responsibility meant risking everything you had to protect people you barely knew, and that true honor came not from the markings on your skin, but from the courage to do what was right when everything was at stake.